Good morning and welcome into the show. It is Daniel Wortman coming to you live from the Dream Imaginate Sports Studios. It is 9 a.m. on the East Coast. This is your 6 a.m. super early morning wake-up call in all time zones in between and around the world. Thanks for tuning in this morning. Yesterday on the show, we had an interview and we were talking about different aspects of U.S. soccer, things that needed its change, and we were looking at diversity, inclusion, and one of the things that our guest, Ahmet Guvener, was referring to was the council structure here in American soccer and really the separation of the councils. They're not in alignment to work with each other. And I thought it would be good to take the intro to today's show and the next few days of the show to talk through why that is, what is actually going on. So today we're going to talk about the Youth Council for just a minute as we open the show and really dig into what is going on, why we have some of the issues that we are having. When you look at U.S. soccer and we look at the structure, there's a lot of things that are wrong about the structure. And when I use the word wrong, what I mean is from a functioning standpoint for serving the purposes of its mission. Its mission is to administer the game, to grow the game in all its forms, and to make it the preeminent sport in America. Well, when you have your councils set up the way they are, it limits your ability to do that. You keep yourself from doing that. And the Federation for decades, this is not a month, this is not days, weeks, this is not a pandemic issue. This is a years upon years, decades upon decades, has had very weak leadership when it comes to bold vision, unifying vision that brings people together. And in its place, you have what has been created is this system of silos. And the word that U.S. Soccer uses are these councils. Now, councils in and of themselves aren't bad, but the way these are structured, it sows seeds of discord. It does not create unity. It breaks up unity. It pits organizations against one another, not on the field where it should be, but in the within the federation in terms of off the field, sometimes even into the courtrooms. And that's where there's a problem. And so today we're going to dig into the Youth Council as we open up the show. And just to give you an idea of U.S. soccer and its Youth Council, the Youth Council is not a part of the federation where they handle youth soccer. Now it is, but it isn't. And here's what I mean. You may be under the impression that U.S. soccer is the governing body for the sport in this country. And on paper, you would be correct, except that they have outsourced that responsibility. And instead of them sanctioning and running youth programming and youth soccer in this country, they've outsourced it to other organizations. And within the structure of U.S. Soccer, what they have done is they've created these U.S. Soccer members, and some of these are sanctioning members. And so basically what they do is they confer upon these organizations. Some of them you may have heard of, U.S. Youth Soccer. That is not the U.S. Soccer Federation working in U.S. Youth Soccer. It's a completely separate organization. It is not governed by U.S. Soccer. It gets its permission to govern from U.S. Soccer, but U.S. Soccer is not managing the day-to-day, the operations, the programming of USYS. That is a separate 501c3. It's a separate organization. You have U.S. Club Soccer, another organization that runs its own programming. AYSO, SAY, USSSA. There are an alphabet soup of organizations that run youth soccer programming that are able to get sanctioning privileges from the federation to run their own programming. So you have multiple organizations, and they're all operating independently of one another, not in cooperation with one another, not in conjunction with one another, not in harmony or unity with one another, but they run competing programming. Well, U.S. Soccer has not only abdicated that responsibility, and a responsibility I think they should have taken on themselves, like every other country in the world, and utilized local offices of the federation, i.e. the state associations, to do this. And since they didn't do it, they have outsourced the youth game to these organizations. Now, what is their mission? Their mission is to run programming to do what? To keep them in business, to make their leaders money. Their job is not to prepare professional players. Their job is not to prepare college players. Their job is to make themselves money. To run a soccer organization so that they can continue to run a soccer organization. Its mission is not to work for the betterment of all players in this country. It's to get people into their programming and funneled up in their system. Now, what has also happened from the federation when it comes to the youth council specifically is U.S. Soccer has not only gone hands off and stepped away, abdicated their responsibility in this space. They have also gone one step further, and they have not only not sanctioned and not run programming, but they've also not set up standards. They've not set forth a system that these organizations should be abiding by, running by, operating by. Therefore, you have U.S. Club Soccer and their ECNL program that goes around marketing itself as the best opportunity for you to play soccer in this country as a youth player. And then you have U.S. Youth Soccer running their programming, proclaiming that they have the best, programming and opportunities for your son or daughter, and so on and so forth through the rest of the alphabet soup. They all run their marketing and talk about things in the way that they talk about them, thinking that they're doing a good job for U.S. Soccer, but they're actually trying to do a good job for themselves, for their organization. I've talked to people throughout the game. I've seen this up close. I've been to AGMs and I've observed so much, had so many conversations on and off the air, and we see it over and over again. Dysfunction, disharmony, clashes, unwillingness to work together. The bottom line is that in the youth soccer space, there should be a structure. And that structure should be very similar to what you would experience on the adult side, which we will get to tomorrow. And in that youth structure, you should have local play. You should have regional play. And it should be layered based on competitive merit, what you do on the field. So you should have multiple tiers within age groups and let teams find their level on their own. I've seen clubs who have had two teams that are really good, but one is forced to play in a lower league. Let both of them play. Let them prove it on the field. Instead of traveling past an organization, a club, because they play with U.S. Club Soccer and you play with U.S. Youth Soccer, this is one of the issues. We create unnecessary travel because one organization is playing with this programming and another organization is playing with this programming, and we're not coming together. And because we're not working together, we're not coming together, we're causing way more issues than we need to. And that is the biggest issue within the youth soccer space. The youth council, instead of being made up of clubs who are operating in the youth space, it's made up by state associations, U.S. Youth Soccer, AYSO, and U.S. Club Soccer, all who are running their own programming, but not working for the kids. They're not working for U.S. Soccer's mission statement. If we really are serious about getting soccer fixed in this country, in a system properly aligned in this country, we've got to stop getting distracted by all of this alphabet soup of this, that, and the other. And we've got to come together. We've got to work together. We've got to stop thinking that if we run this super excellent, elite, world-class academy program and every other adjective that you can think of to throw on to a status and a marketing pitch, and we've got to get down to the basics. That's what we're missing. We have all this fluff and not the right stuff underneath. That is getting clubs playing locally, playing regionally based on competitive merit. The rest will begin to take care of itself. We'll lower travel fees, we'll lower costs, and I guarantee you there will be a lot of clubs and coaches that will be found out. They can't hide behind a label. They'll have to prove it on the field. Our sponsor this half hour is Ductic Brand, DUKTIG brand.com. They are the makers of really cool products, and if you haven't checked them out recently, you should check them out today at ducticbrand.com. Use promo code DWSHOW. You'll get 10% off of that order. We'll be right back with Serenity Liessmann right after this. Welcome back into the show. Thanks for tuning in today. We are pleased to be joined by Serenity Liessmann. She is a contributor with Vendetta Sports, on to talk about a recent article looking at some of the issues facing American soccer. Serenity, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you.
Thanks for being on. You and I had a chance to talk in advance of you publishing your article, and had a little bit of a conversation about different things that I see around the sport and that you see around the sport. And I thought it would be great to, now that you've got your article published, to kind of talk about it on the show. And some of the things that we discussed and that you covered in the article, I feel like are really important issues facing American soccer. You talked about at the top of your article, quote, there is a lot of current problems with American soccer right now. I am not talking about the U.S. women's national team's court case getting denied, but rather the fundamental problems of how soccer is set up in the United States. And I think that is an absolute, if you were to look at issues facing American soccer, we could get into specifics, and I'm sure we will here over the course of the next few minutes about specific issues facing American soccer. But the idea that the big idea, the big picture, the structure level of the sport is fundamentally flawed is an important point that I don't think enough people they feel it. Parents feel it sometimes, coaches feel it sometimes, but they don't really know what they're feeling. They think, oh, I didn't get this chance, right? And they zero in on that specific moment, not realizing it's actually a part of a bigger issue, as you point out. The first thing that you kind of went into in your article is cost, the cost to put your kids through soccer. Tell me a little bit about your thinking, your experience, what shaped your thought process around the cost and how we do soccer in this country.
Yeah, so when I originally started, I was doing rec, which I didn't know the specific cost of that. But when I got into competitive and I did that for about 3 years, my parents are spending at least $200 a season, and that's not including any travel costs. And with the team, because where I'm from in Nevada, we don't get as much competition because we're not in Las Vegas, we're in Reno. And so what happens is that we go to North California to do tournaments. So we're going over there every weekend, spending money on hotels, spending money on food, and just absolutely everything. So it's not just the cost to have kids play, but it's also the travel expenses that go with it. And you're not even talking about the equipment. So getting, new cleats every season because kids grow like crazy, or even getting them new shin guards. It's like the amount that you have to put into it is insane. So if you don't have the financial ability to do that, then your kid's most likely not going to keep playing.
In terms of your personal experience, did you see or know of people that basically just got priced out along the way? They just, they couldn't keep affording it, or maybe never got into it because they were just like, I can't do that. I can't travel every weekend. I can't, pay that kind of price. Did you see any of that up close in your playing and coming up through the system?
Personally, when I was doing competitive, there was definitely some weekends where girls on my team just couldn't go. A lot of times we did try to carpool with each other or even share hotel rooms, so then that way we weren't spending as much money. But even then, there were girls that couldn't come on specific weekends. And even now with, my youngest brother, he plays, and he's had, kids on his team that hasn't been able to do that either. So it's not just a thing that happened a while ago, it's still occurring.
Yeah, it is that when we talk about pay to play soccer, and we talk a lot about that on this show, we talk about it. I think from a big picture, like the people are paying all these fees. We don't necessarily always break down where does the money go, right? There's billions in youth sports being spent every year. It's a massive industry. People don't realize how big it is, but that money goes in a variety of places, and a lot of that is directly attributed to U.S. soccer's system, which basically makes that engine work, right? Because of the way they structure competitions, Now you've got added expenses, like you mentioned, hotel, travel, gas, the food, out of town food, etc. A hidden cost that I don't think people realize when they're first getting into this, as well as is time off of work, and parents having to make sacrifices there, or changes of schedules there to accommodate the travel or training, and different aspects there. So equipment, obviously, jerseys, obviously, league fees, club fees, those are things you see when a club sends out an invitation. Hey, play with us this season. Here are your fees. What you don't see when you pay that $500 bill or $1,000 bill, $2,000 bill, whatever the case is, when you're in that kind of travel world, is that it's almost like fine print, but it's invisible ink at the bottom of the page. It's like, yeah, you paid the 500. However, you're going to pay another $1,000 in travel cost, or $2,000 in travel cost. And it is a steep price. And it's certainly not a way, if we are, if our federation and the leaders in our sport are wanting more kids to play and play for a longer amount of time, meaning, as they get older, we've got to address costs. We've got to reduce the cost, which is a structural issue. And it's certainly not something that you can, just dismiss. It's a real cost that families can't get around, and a real cost that adds up, even if it is in that kind of invisible, small, subsection of your agreement to play with the clubs. Like, oh, by the way, we're gonna take you to a lot of places. It's gonna cost you a lot of money. Like, there's no disclosure there, right, when you get in, and so that's a big thing. Another thing that to me contributes to that is another point you brought up, which is lack of education. How has this lack of education, as you see it, affected American soccer and in our entire structure and system?
The biggest point for me is the coaching aspect of this. So, and I've had conversations with my dad about this. So he had, looking back on it, he wished that he would have switched me to maybe a different team, or talked to my coach more, because he didn't really see me progressing as much as I maybe should have, or the way that my dad thought would be better for me, but he didn't really know how to address that. And now with my younger brother, he's had the experience, so he knows how to talk about this stuff. But parents who are doing this first time, they're not going to know. And I have been coaching with a soccer program called Soccer Sprouts, and we really just do like fundamental basics. But I have parents coming up to me asking, okay, well, is this club good? What about these coaches? And they know that I've played in this area before, but they have no idea like any type of coaching that's going to help their kids develop better. They have no idea really how the system works at all. So they have to come, to me. And that's just me seeing that these parents aren't actually getting educated on how our system actually works. So they don't know anything, which means that they're getting blindsided by things like costs.
Yeah. So when Eric Winaldo was running for president of U.S. Soccer, he turned to me one time when we were out traveling during this campaign, and he said the biggest area that U.S. Soccer could make a difference right now is parent education. And I was like, what? I mean, we've got a lot of issues. And he said, I'm telling you, like, they're in areas they shouldn't be. They're mismanaging other areas that they should manage better. But the area they've completely vacated and not done anything to is parent education. Parents don't know what they don't know. They don't know where to turn. There is no guide for them, and your experience is highlighting that yet again. that a lot of people just, they don't know. I've had these conversations with parents. A few months ago, I was out at dinner, and I had several, parents that their kids play soccer, and they were asking me questions, and I was having to sit down and kind of educate them on, okay, well, here is the U.S. youth soccer landscape, right? And there's this sanctioning organization and this different sanctioning organization, and there's these tournaments, and there's this, and they're like, what? I didn't even know all this. So, it's when we talk about pathways for players and pathways for coaches and different things like that, one of the things when it comes to this lack of education is parents don't even know that there is a pathway or what a pathway might look like, that there's actually multiple pathways in American soccer because we haven't clearly defined anything. And a lot, I remember a conversation recently with a dad who is, was like, I don't even know what I'm paying for. And it's just one of those cycles where you just, every kind of new parent is kind of like thrown into the wild. Hey, figure it out, and they don't know what they don't know. And ultimately, I think where it really affects us, and you pointed this out, is our culture. How is that lack of education, in your view, shaped or hurt our ability to really build a robust footballing, soccer culture?
Well, it's like we have talked about this, soccer is not embedded into our culture like football is. We don't have, for football, you can go over to somebody's house to do Super Bowl Sunday, and that's something of American culture. Here we don't have that for soccer. Like, if you ask people, they probably would have said, yeah, I played soccer when I was younger, but I didn't really stick with it. And so they don't have any real connection to it. And I think that really a lot of people just flock to sports because you're making all of these connections with people that you might not have otherwise. And, in Europe, what are they doing when a soccer game's on? They're going to the local pub and they're really just building a community out of it. But we don't have that here. And so we're missing out on a huge community opportunity.
Yeah, that shared community is so big, right? And celebrating, the sport, and it's, you see a little bit in pockets, like in places around the country, but it's not widespread. And I actually am of the belief, maybe I'm just too optimistic here, but I'm of the belief that it would build and spread and grow really quickly in a proper structure. That I think that families who are involved right now would be even more, quick to really buy into soccer culture. Would we have a lot of like newbies to that soccer culture aspect, like they're beyond just being the spectator for their child? Yeah, but I think over time that would actually grow really quickly. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that the NBA's finals were tape delayed. And everybody now is like, what? Like, tape delay. What is tape, right? That's the first question. What is tape? But, it was not even live and in prime time. And then now we obviously, you couldn't imagine not having the NBA and their finals and even their regular season matches, games on television. And that's grown over the last few decades. I think soccer would be similar in that way, that I think it could have a massive foothold in this country in very short order in the grand scheme of things if the culture was able to really grow and spread. And part of that's the education piece you talked about. Part of that is the structure, which leads me to this, which is the structure that right now we experience is clubs get their revenue in the youth landscape primarily from families. In the adult amateur landscape, they're primarily getting their funding either from their investor owners or from selling of some tickets, but they are having to pay to get into the leagues they want to play, just like the youth teams do. And even at our professional levels, it's the same thing. It's a pay to play in that league, whether it's Major League Soccer, whether it's NISA, whether it's the USL. Every league we look at is a pay to play entrance, and it's primarily at the adult, amateur, and professional levels. All the revenue comes from match days. There's very little other revenue. On the youth side, it's primarily coming from families. How, in your kind of research and looking at this issue, how has that compared to what you've seen overseas, and how has that had an impact on the sport here in America?
I think it's pretty sad that we don't give as much opportunity to kids that aren't, that can't financially have it without, the European system, or basically the rest of the world. We wouldn't get, the Messis or the Pelés or any of that. So we're really just stripping these kids of opportunity, and they may be really, really talented, but if they don't have the money, then they're not going to get farther. And it's really sad because I've seen this with my coaching. There are kids that I can see that really just need a place to almost call home. And so they come each week with the same kids, with the same coaches, and you're really connecting with everybody there. And their home lives may not be super, super fantastic. So when they're coming and playing soccer, it's almost like they just get to forget all of that. But I've seen kids fall out of the program because they may not be able to financially stay in it. And it's just really sad that they don't get the opportunity to stay with that community or that home that they're building.
Yeah, I think that point is so good. And to build on that, one of the things that I've seen with some of these kids is they may be good, and clubs will often, taunt or say, not taunt, it's the wrong word, but to proclaim that we give out scholarships. Well, that is kind of a Band-Aid that might help, a kid here or there. But structurally, what happens when you've got 12, 13, 14 kids whose families are paying? Then you've got one kid who's pretty good, but he can't afford it. Do the rest of those families want that kid on the team, taking away their kids' playing time when they're paying all the money and this kid's not paying anything? It builds these social dynamics unnecessarily into, the setup, and it creates pressures on coaches. How do I handle that? How do I handle the playing time? I know this kid isn't able to pay what the rest of my players are able to pay, but they're really good. And they, on their own merit, they deserve playing time, but I'm staring across the field at this, row of lawn chairs and beach chairs, and I see all these parents who have paid the funds that pay my paycheck, and I've got to take, some of their kids' playing time away to give to a scholarship kid, right? And so, it's easy to kind of dismiss that aspect and just be like, well, clubs can give scholarships and that takes care of that. No, it doesn't. There are other things that are part of it. And what I've found, I used to run a non-pay to play club. So it was a free to play club. Sponsors and my company basically funded everything, and we didn't charge anybody anything. And for that, there was a couple things that we had to face as a reality. Number one is if the families aren't paying, obviously we knew where we had to go to get revenue. Number two, we had to be really good at controlling our costs. So all of our coaches were volunteers, and we tried to be really smart about how we spent, where we spent our money. And the other thing that we had to take into account is that we could only offer this program to a select number of kids, because every kid to us was an expense, and every kid in a pay-to-play program is an income. And so it was completely opposite. So we couldn't have like 4 million kids running around. Our squad was basically 25 kids. It was a small program. But one of the hidden things that we, going back to what we talked about a few minutes ago about the costs that families pay, one of the hidden things that I didn't realize before I got into that project is how much those kids who can afford to play also have other issues that keep them from playing. For example, parents' work schedules, transportation. And I'm not talking about getting them from Nevada to Northern California for a tournament. I'm talking about getting them from their house to the soccer field to train on Tuesday night, and getting them back home. Making sure for some of them, making sure they're doing their homework and that they're, it was a big, like, holistic thing. And so it's a much bigger issue than just a scholarship. And, it goes beyond there's just more nuance to that issue, and to reduce it to, hey, we'll charge enough money to 14 of the parents so that the 15th kid can go play on a scholarship. That doesn't fix everything. That might make you feel good, and it might be helpful to that kid, and it might work out in that situation, but I don't think it's enough of a fix in that area. One of the other areas that we don't see that affects this revenue aspect is the lack of sporting merit in this country, right? That your bigger clubs are not driving revenues at a big enough level that can filter down through the system, through those other revenue streams, whether that's television money that gets distributed down, whether that's solidarity payments and training compensation that trickles down, whether that's the player transfer market where, a smaller club in Reno develops a player and they sell them to a bigger club in LA. Now, all of a sudden we just got, $100,000, $200,000 to run our program. That's another aspect that we don't see in this country. And then obviously the commercial revenues, the big sponsorship deals are not flowing down either. So when we don't have, an FC Barcelona, Liverpool, Bayern Munich type of mega big, huge clubs that are in a system that is producing massive amounts of revenues that then is able to get shared throughout the pyramid, we are reduced to finding revenue in other places, which is what we see in the youth space. How have you seen that lack of multiple tiered sporting merit system really affect the American soccer landscape in your research for this article?
Well, we were talking about this. People aren't really getting as engaged with soccer, maybe because they think it's boring or whatever. I've heard that excuse a lot. But just if we could actually have relegation, I think that would be much more competitive. And like I said in my article, I think one of the first steps would be actually making sure that we have more teams. So we have, 26 in MLS? That's for a whole entire, our country, which is huge. So that's obviously not enough. And so if I'm thinking if we're connecting at least MLS and let's say USL, we get some more teams. We were talking, 80 teams. So you get all of the people who have local pride engaged, whether they are a soccer fan or not, because people have pride for their city, and so they're going to get behind that. And if they have, let's say, my USL team, Reno 1868, if they had a chance to, go play in League One, then we would all be standing behind that, and the city would be erupting with just excitement. And so you'd get a lot more community engagement if we could get that going.
Yeah, that community pride thing is so big. I mean, we see it, at the college level, like you've got your college that you identify with or that you root for, et cetera, in college sports. But then, like, you get down to the high school level, and to me, that's where it gets really kind of this visceral feeling, like that's my high school, and we're
Mm-hmm.
playing them, right? And there's that, like, it. You could not care at all about the sport, but it's like I want my school to do well. Like there's a pride in that, granular level, local level attachment, emotional attachment, and feeling to your high school. And I feel like that's what we're missing, in the club soccer space. We're missing that, and there's so many gaps, and it's not just, some will say, well, yeah, we've got a couple dozen playing in Major League Soccer. We've got about 3 dozen playing in the USL Championship. And we're adding more. We're getting there. I'm like, bro, this country's huge, and like the city of New York could have like 20 of these things, like that are like legit, like huge clubs just in New York. I mean, look at London and how many clubs are in the Premier League. Now, I'm not talking about the league system. That there are, London-based clubs all throughout the pyramid in England, but just in the Premier League, the Arsenals, the Chelseas, the West Hams, Tottenham, Crystal Palace. I mean, all clubs that are, right there in London, and there are more in that kind of surrounding area. To think that Los Angeles, and San Diego and San Francisco and New York and Chicago and Miami, and I'm naming some really big cities in the global landscape of things that could easily support not just one or two, but multiple bona fide, really solid big clubs. Now, there might be one or two that are a mega club in a market, but that's going to be, that would be a situation where they've earned that, right? They've built it themselves. Maybe they've gone out and sought investment and got it to a point to where it could dominate. Like one area that doesn't get talked about a lot when we look at American soccer and, promotion relegation, and, New York and Los Angeles and Chicago could easily support multiple teams. One area that never gets talked about is Atlanta. Atlanta is one of the fastest growing areas in this country. And the way it's laid out, if you've never been there, it's not like super concentrated into one geographic little spot called Atlanta. It's like this giant blob, this ring that is just growing. They're having conversations now because decades ago, there's 3 main interstates that kind of intersect through Atlanta: 85, 75, and 20. And they built this ring around the city called 285, and it created this donut right around the city of Atlanta, and it gave people access to kind of get around east west and alleviate some downtown traffic there. And what they're going back and looking at now is like, we think we're going to have to build a bigger ring. Like we're going to have a second ring outside of 285. That city, everybody knows Atlanta United right there in downtown, Arthur Blank's team. But if you've been to Atlanta, if you know people from Atlanta, you would know that area, that city is over 6 million people and growing. The idea that Atlanta couldn't on its own have 2 or 3 or 4 like bona fide legitimate clubs. And we've only talked about a half a dozen cities, so the potential is huge if we are allowing entrance based on sporting merit, which ultimately does what you pointed out in your article, which is connectivity, which is so important. I want to feel connected to my team, my city, my club, and in order to do that, my club has to be connected to other clubs in other cities and other leagues based on what they do on the field, not just pay to play entrance into those leagues. So I'm curious, looking at the landscape of American soccer and looking at the sporting merit piece, looking at connection, how do you see the kind of if it was a before and after, right? So if we were connected versus the unconnected, How would you see that when you're looking at this issue? How would you see that if we were connected? How do you think communities would feel if they were fully connected?
I think it'd be fantastic because if we are able to create a lot more teams, then think about how many more rivalries you're going to have and how popular are rivalry games. You know, everybody looks forward to those. And you would just feel more prideful for your team. And also, another thing that I think relegation would do is that it would make the teams focus more on developing skills of their players, which I personally have seen, especially at least like in my high school. The boys' team, all they did was run. They would barely touch the ball, which was crazy to me. Which I get the fitness aspect. Yes, you want your team to be, fit, but they wouldn't ever touch the ball. And I think what coaches, well, I've seen this where coaches are focusing more on, hey, I get this much amount of money if I, get the team here. But they completely forget to look at each individual player and work with them to develop skills. So if we had relegation, I think these teams would be focusing more on improving their players' skills and actually creating a better game. So then that way they may go from League Two to League One. And I think developing skills is probably one of the most important aspects of this game because you're just always learning. So I think it would be fantastic if we could actually get that to happen rather than right now where it's just more focused on money. And I think we could be focusing more on developing skills.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Developing the field, what's on the field, not just the bank accounts off the field, is so good. The last kind of area that you zeroed in on is one I want to zero in as we're coming towards the end here of our interview, which is creating stories. I think it's such a big thing, like covering the sport, looking at different areas beyond Major League Soccer, beyond the NWSL in American soccer. One of the guys in the projects that's inspired me, and I told you this on the phone, is Non-League America and Steve Bailey and the work that they've done to cover the sport at multiple levels beyond just what you might find at ESPN or Fox. They're really, bringing some really cool stories. How important is storytelling and highlighting stories and telling these stories and sharing these stories throughout the landscape of American soccer important to building our culture, reshaping our culture, and ultimately getting us into a better system?
I think this all goes back to connectivity, whether that's, just connecting all the leagues or just connecting people. The way that you connect to people is by telling stories, because you say a story and then someone else goes, oh yeah, like I also had the same experience, and you feel a community growing because you're relating to somebody else. And personally with the Non-League America, I connected especially to the Vietnamese one because my family is from Vietnam. And so it was just super cool to see that. Do I know any of those people? No, I don't. But I felt connected to them regardless because they were, playing soccer, and we also have, same nationality basically. And it's just connecting people and feeling like a place of community and home. And I think soccer, and even really any sport, that's what it does. It just creates a home for people.
Speaking of that Vietnamese story that Non-League America put out, which is a really cool story. If you haven't had a moment to check that out and you're watching this interview, I definitely highly recommend checking out Non-League America, their documentary series and their stories that they put out. It's some really good work. And Steve's been on the show. He's a friend of the show, and I appreciate his work. And this story in particular, I found to be really a really cool story. And one of the things that I saw, and I want to ask this question of you, is you have this culture that, like, we're going to do our thing. It doesn't matter really what's going on. Like, we're going to do our thing. But if we had a connected system, how much does that thing that they're doing right now that's just, where it is, how it is, how much could that thing grow and build and really like be able to connect to you and others on a bigger scale than just, oh, that was a nice story. But like it becomes like something like, oh, I love those guys, and that like it just kind of, you know what I'm saying? So like when you saw the story and were inspired by it, what did that do for you? Like as a soccer player, as a soccer fan, as a soccer coach, and seeing that story, how did that connect with you?
I don't know. It was really filled with hope, I guess. I know, California has a huge Asian population. I've also been down to Texas, Dallas, and that was a huge Asian culture. And it's insane because I didn't even know that there was a huge Asian culture in Texas. And so I think if we were actually able to connect, then you're just able to connect all of these, groups, whether it's, Asians or Hispanics or any of that. You're connecting all of these groups and creating just one big community and story, and you get to connect with people and have one-on-one conversations. And I think that's really helpful for growing the sport and also just growing the community in general.
I think it's important that we get to a mentality with American soccer, especially with this federation, that we don't have to force exactly what you look like and what you do. We create a system that allows you to shape that for yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then you could have, an ethnic club that's formed, and that's part of its identity, right? Like in Chicago, there are some deep rooted Polish clubs in Chicago. That's part of the soccer landscape there. Matter of fact, we were hosted at one of these clubs in January of 2018 during Eric's run for president, and we did a live streamed event from this Polish football club, Polish soccer club. They had a clubhouse and everything. It was awesome, and to see a system that encourages that, it doesn't matter where you're from, it doesn't matter your background. You build your club that identifies with your people and the way that you want to build it. So it might be, a club that's like, primarily Latino or primarily Vietnamese or primarily Polish. That's cool. That's your thing. You do what you do, right?
Mm-hmm.
But let's create a system that allows you to do you. You may start there, but as you grow and as you build, it may morph. It may, change its shape. Who knows? But I think this top-down control of what a club can be and where it can come from and what it should look like, needs to get thrown out. And I think we need to be more open-minded, more welcoming to say, hey, here are the slots, right, in the system. Here are the places where teams can play, and you do you and figure out how to get there, right? And allow that pathway for a club to be there, so that when a non-league America is doing a story about, these Vietnamese teams playing and chasing dreams and doing what they're doing, all of a sudden, like, that gets welcomed into the American soccer landscape, and it's a different conversation at that point. It's a different landscape. It's a different experience for people, and I think that would be another piece that would really go a long way to shaping our American, soccer culture as well. So, I loved what you wrote. I'm really happy to see that there are people that are seeing what could be, not just the problems that are, but what could be in the future for American soccer. That excites me. That's why I do what I do every day. Is I hope more and more people do that, and I'm really happy to have you on to talk about that. How can people connect with you, follow your work, and read more of your articles for Vendetta?
Honestly, following my Twitter would be the best way. It's at SL Liessmann. I promote all of my stuff for Vendetta. Even going to the vendettasportsmedia.com website would also work. There's a lot of other great work. Gavin also does a lot of soccer. He has one on the site about non-league America specifically. So yeah, I think that'd be the best way.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on the show. Great article. Keep up the great work. We appreciate it. And we look forward to having you back on again soon. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We'll be right back after this.
No one, no man, no woman, no child should ever have to drink green water with bugs, with algae, with disease in it. Bad water and a lack of toilets kills more people than all the wars in the world. We know how to bring clean drinking water right now to every single person on earth. And when you can bring water into communities, it truly transforms them. It changes everything. Or you could know that you'd made a difference. You could know that you had truly impacted the life of a family, of a community, of a region. There was either clean water or there wasn't. We believe in a world where every single person has clean and safe water to drink, and we will continue fighting until that happens.
पहिला म पनि बच्चा अवस्थामा रहँदाखेरि मैले यो कल्पना गरेको थिइनँ कि तर अहिलेको बच्चाहरूलाई मैले सोद्धाखेरि अथवा उनीहरूलाई क्लासमा गएर तिमी के भन्ने भनेर भन्दाखेरि उनीहरू बच्चाहरूले 1 क्लास 2 क्लास 3 क्लासका बच्चाहरूले उनीहरूले सहजै रूपमा चाहिँ अभिव्यक्त गर्न सक्छन्।
म टिचर बन्छु, सोशल वर्क, इन्जिनियर।
I am to be a pilot.
जस्तै म पुलिस बन्न चाहन्छु।
I want to be nurse.
Thanks for watching the show. As always, thanks to Serenity for coming on the show today. We appreciate it. As always, you can watch at danielurban.com/watch. We'll see you again tomorrow.